from the first chapter of Matthew, verses 1 through 17. And if you don't recognize the names, it's because they're in Swahili. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah was the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Amon. Amon was the father of Josiah. Josiah was the father of Jehoiachin and his brothers, born at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the Babylonian exile, Jehoiachin was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. Abiud was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim was the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Achim. Achim was the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar was the father of Mathan. Mathan was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Messiah. All those listed above include 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah.
Riveting stuff, right? I remember when I was an atheist teenager, and I decided that I was going to dismantle Christianity. Just deconstruct, destroy it, just lay it bare and demolish it. And some of you know Pete Copeland here, right? Well, me and Pete were friends in high school. His family was totally Bible-thumping Christians, and I didn't grow up like that. But I was at his house, and there was a Bible at his house, and in the basement, I just sat at the desk, I opened the Bible to Genesis 1, and I said, you know what? I'm going to take all of the wisdom, experience, intelligence, and life that this 16-year-old can muster, and I'm going to read the Bible, and I'm going to destroy it. Because before this, I had read books that talked about all the contradictions in the Bible. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to find more. Then I have more ammo, so when I talk to the next Christian, I know I can just demolish him. Because I was a good person. And so I sat down, I opened the Bible to Genesis 1. I thought, here we go. Destruction will begin. And so in Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty, and it just goes on. And so chapter 1, God creates stuff. And I thought, okay, got it. So in chapter 2, and there's another creation story. He makes Adam and Eve out of dirt, breathes life into them. I'm like, okay, got it. Chapter 3, humans mess everything up, right? They sin, they eat from the tree they weren't supposed to eat from, they get exiled. Okay, got that story. And these stories are totally making sense to me, and they're kind of interesting, if only because I want to destroy them someday. Then in chapter 4, Cain kills Abel. I get it. Like, I wanted to kill my brother sometimes, I was like, yeah, I got you. And then I get to chapter 5. And I was not reading the NIV or the NLT or any of these things you cool kids are reading now. I was reading the King James Version. And this is what the King James Version says when you get to chapter 5. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Okay, makes sense. Male and female, he created them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness and after his image and called him Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years and he died. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begot Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days Seth were 912 years and he died. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos lived after he begot Canaan. Boom, and that's about when my head hit the desk. So boring. And so my project to destroy Christianity was subverted by God through boredom in Genesis chapter 5. And that's what happens to a lot of people. They start reading the Bible, and they get some stuff, and they like some of the stories, and then they get to a chapter where it's this guy begot that guy, begot that guy, begot that guy. And then it begot that guy, then it begot, and it just goes on forever, and you're like, why? Why? And you go through the Bible, and this happens, because you go through Genesis, and there's other cool stories. There's a story about a guy named Abraham. Now, Abraham is considered, have you ever heard the Abrahamic faiths? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? So Abraham's kind of a big deal, right? Kind of a big deal. Very influential. And he's the father of all the Hebrew, all the Israelite, all the Jewish people. And so Abraham is the first person in the Bible that we see called a Hebrew. And so Abraham, he's chilling where he's living. God calls him out of the place where he lives to a land he will show him. Abraham, in faith, leaves the place he used to live, starts heading to this new place. He doesn't know what it is. And when he gets there, God shows him all this land. And he says, this land, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to fill it with your descendants, even though you're all old and crusty and wrinkly and played out. And after I give you this land, I'm going to fill it. And through your people, I'm going to bless the whole world. And the whole world's going to be blessed through you. And then Abraham goes through all kinds of trials and all kinds of weird stuff happens. Have you guys read the book of Genesis? Weird stuff happens, right? And so it talks about descendants and family members, and it just goes on. And then you get to Exodus, and at some point in Exodus, it starts talking about all these laws. And it starts talking about the dimensions of this tabernacle they're supposed to build, and what they're supposed to build it out of, and how big they're supposed to build it, and how tall and wide and deep, and what materials they're supposed to use, and who's supposed to do what, and how they're supposed to collect the money for it in detail. And you just, so if you get through that, it's cool, though, because, there's plagues in Exodus. There's God beating up all the gods of Egypt and Pharaoh getting schooled, and then the Israelites get delivered. So it's cool. Then you get to Leviticus, and it's more laws. Then you get to Numbers, and it's cool because there's not as many laws in Numbers, but there's a lot of numbers. You know why they call it numbers? It's because they count everybody. That's actually, here, I'll give you a sample. You guys are here for it, right? Okay. This is how the book starts. This is a Bible book. Starts out saying this. Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, take a census. Like, this is going to be an intense book. It's going to be awesome. Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to count according to their divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years or older, or more, and able to serve in the army. One man from each tribe, each of them the head of his family, is to help you. These are the names of the men who are to assist you. From Reuben, Eliezer, son of Shedeur. From Simeon, Shelumiel, son of Zerushadai. From Judah, Nashon, son of Aminadab. From Issachar, bum stiggity bum bum. And then it goes on for verses, and it goes on, and then when it takes a census, it starts listing everybody and all the names and stuff. And this happens multiple times in the Bible where it gets into these genealogies. And if you want to read the Bible, you start in the beginning and you just want to plow through to the end. These are the places that end you, right? These are the sections in the Bible that break your will and make you quit. And so here I am, later on in my life, a new Christian, and I'm like, I'm going to learn about Jesus. What do you think I decided to do? I'm going to read the Bible. What should I read? Hey, I'll read the New Testament, and I'm going to read about Matthew. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, son of Abraham. And I'm like, man, I want stories. Like, Abraham's a cool story. David. Do you guys know about King David? Super complicated person. Kind of a genocidal maniac, but also a chosen man of God. So you got to weigh him out. But he went, killed Goliath with a single stone. He was a shepherd boy who became king. There were all these different tribes that were around. The first king, his name was Saul. Saul decides he hates David and he wants to hunt him down. So the stories in the Bible where David is like doing guerrilla warfare and avoiding Saul and trying to stay alive. And it's awesome. And once he has a chance to kill Saul, and he goes up to him, and instead of killing him, he cuts off a piece of his cloth, and then he sneaks off. Like, what's he doing? Then Saul goes out, and he comes out of the cave Saul was just in, and he goes, I had you. Proof. He goes, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Last chance, leave me alone. I mean, there's awesome stories in there. And Saul's like, my bad, and then he tries to kill him again, and it just keeps going. But David is this amazing figure because there were all these different tribes. And you know what he did? He united all of the tribes and made all the people one nation. And then after he united all the tribes, he was a powerful king. He did a great job keeping them united. Then he had a son named Solomon. You guys know about Solomon, wisest person who ever lived, built the temple? That was the son of David. And so David became this legend. I mean, Abraham was a legend because Abraham was the father of all the Jewish people, and through him, somehow the whole world was going to get blessed. And then David was a legend because he was he was the second king, but he was the first king that united everybody together. It didn't last long, but he became this legend. He killed Goliath. He spared Saul's life. I mean, there's all these legendary figures, and that's what I wanted. And then I got this. And so, honestly, I kind of skipped over it and just went to the next section, which was a huge mistake. It turns out there's a reason these boring sections are in the Bible. And it turns out they're boring to us because we're us. And we're Westerners who live thousands of miles from the place they were written, thousands of years after they were written, in a whole different culture, in a different language. So what I want to do today is I want to go back, and I want to read it and kind of see it as much as possible, like the first people who would have read it, so we know what it means. Because it's no accident that Matthew starts his book with this specific genealogy. He does it on purpose, and there's a lot of meaning in it. So, we're going to read through this again, and before we leave, I'm going to blow your mind with how meaningful this passage is. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. We just talked about those guys, right? So Matthew's saying Jesus is a descendant of Abraham, which all Jews were, but he's also a descendant of David, which means what's he trying to clue you into early on? He's of noble descent. He's of royal blood. He's in the kingly line. So he's already hinting now that Jesus is some kind of king. And through the rest of Matthew, he's going to flesh that out quite a bit. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac Jacob, Jacob father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah. Then it does something very strange. It says, whose mother was Tamar. That's weird, because women in these days, you didn't belong in genealogies. You were the property of your dad until you were the property of your husband. That's it. The line was always traced through the men. And this isn't just like ancient Middle East. Matthew's writing this also in the ancient Middle East. So Tamar just didn't live in the ancient Middle East, but Matthew's writing this book in the ancient Middle East. Women, how much status do you think you had in the ancient Middle East? And so Matthew was here saying, yeah, and there was this woman named Tamar. That was the mom, by the way. And then he goes on, and you think, what is he doing? And we have other genealogies from other ancient historians who are writing at this time. They don't include women. Because in every other genealogy, apparently besides Matthew's, women don't matter. So that's something else. You're like, okay, what is going on here? What's Matthew up to? Pays to be a nerd. Learn to enjoy your genealogies. So, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron, Ram, Aminadab, Nashon, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was who? Rahab. Okay, now we did it twice. Now we brought up two women. And you know well, I'll keep going, then we'll talk about it. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was whose mother was Ruth. Okay, that's 3 times. Do you think this is happening on accident? Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. Yeah. Okay, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Why? That's the 4th time. Doesn't this guy know how to write a decent genealogy? He keeps sneaking all these women in here. You know what's worse? These women aren't even Jewish. None of them. So, cool that you pointed out Jesus is a descendant of a royal king, but now you're bringing up all these Gentile women. Kind of annoying. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Uzziah. A lot of these are kings, by the way, and other people. Uzziah, the father of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah. Josiah was gangster in the Old Testament, by the way. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Okay, so you have one chunk from Abraham to David. You have this other chunk from David down to the exile to Babylon, which was a big deal. The Jews had their own country. Remember how David had the united country together? Well, eventually after his time, there was a civil war and it became 2 countries. There was the north and the south. The northern country was called Israel, which we still know that name today. The southern country was called Judah. In 722 BC, Israel got demolished by the Assyrians, and they stopped being a country. They just got destroyed. They decided not to pay tribute, so Assyria showed up to collect the money, and they said, well, for punishment, we're going to destroy all of you, and that's what they did. And now those are referred to as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. The southern 2 tribes was from the southern country of Judah. They got demolished in 586 or 87 BC by the Babylonians. And it's the same reason. They said, yeah, we don't like you guys anymore. We're going to team up with the Egyptians and be our own country. I'm grown, Dad. I don't have to listen to you, right? And then Babylon came over and killed everybody and took their stuff. And then they took all of the elites and they deported them back to Babylon and made them serve the Babylonian elite back there. And that was called the exile. Huge event. Huge event. So he traces it into that. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah, the father of Shealtiel, Zerubbabel, Abihud, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Akim, Elihud, the father of Eleazar, the father of Matan, the father of Jacob, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Here we go again. Why is Mary in here? The husband of Mary, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Okay, so we have all these stories in the Old Testament about David, about Abraham, about Tamar, about Rahab, about Ruth, about Bathsheba, who was Uriah's wife. Do you guys know that story? King David was at home when he was supposed to be at war, and he saw this fine thing on the roof of another building, and he told his people to go collect her for him, and they did. And she was the wife of another man. Well, she got pregnant by David, so he took the soldier who was her husband, put him on the front lines in war to guarantee that he would get killed in battle, which he was. And then after David had him arranged for his death in battle, he took his wife into his house because she was pregnant to be his own wife. And that's the one he mentions here, and that was Solomon's mother. She was one of David's wives, by the way. So there's all these stories in the Old Testament mixed between these boring sections we have a hard time getting through. But what's this deal with Messiah? At the end it says this. Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary was the mother of Jesus, who called the Messiah. What does Messiah mean? You guys ready to learn a second language? Come on. You guys ready to learn a second language? Okay, I'm going to teach you Koine Greek. Ready? Messiah, or Mashiach, that means anointed one. If you translate it into Greek, Messiah or anointed one in Greek, the word is Christ. So Jesus Christ is not his last name, it's actually his title. It's Jesus the Anointed One. Jesus the Christ. And in the Old Testament, the people who were anointed were kings. Samuel anointed Saul, and every king who came to take their place, they were anointed. This actually continued through the Middle Ages in Europe, where kings would take the role, and they would get anointed by a priest as well with oil. So this anointing, it meant that you were being prepared for a special task, and you were especially called by God to do this task. So he's saying Jesus is this Messiah, he's this anointed one. But by this time in history, Messiah was no longer just like a general term. It got kind of specific. And let me tell you why. So remember David made a nation, and then they weren't a nation anymore? Well, right before Jesus' time, the Jews weren't a nation for a very long time. And then right before Jesus' time, the ancient Israelites became a nation again. You guys ever hear of Hanukkah or the Maccabees? That's kind of that story. It's kind of awesome, actually. This guy comes up he came up to do a pagan sacrifice, and a Jewish priest wouldn't let him, and so the Jewish priest killed him on the spot. And then it was like a Braveheart situation where they started doing guerrilla warfare, and all these Jewish priests and like revolutionaries started fighting against the people who were overpowered over them. Well, here's what's crazy what happened. They actually won. And they became their own country again until Caesar showed up. You guys know Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius. So the Caesars had a habit of showing up and saying, oh yeah, like your drink, that's mine now. And they would just take it. So they show up, hey, Egypt, this is cool. These pyramids are cool. They're mine now. And Egypt Rome, they just took everything. So Rome ruled over the whole Mediterranean area, including Egypt, and including a bunch of these countries that in the past had conquered Israel. And guess who they also owned? Israel. They made Israel like a state again. So Israel was no longer the United States, it was Washington, It got switched up. So here's what they thought. They thought the Messiah was going to be this literal human being that was going to come back and be a literal king and throw off all the terrible oppression that the Romans did to the Jews. And so the Jews would become their own country again, and they'd have their own king, and nobody could mess with them again because they have the king of all kings. And this Messiah would be that person. The first time I learned about this idea, I thought, that is so naive. That's so naive. Just to believe one person's going to show up and like deliver and save and be a political figure that's going to lead people to like a new prosperity. And I said, in the United States today, there's no way people would rally around a political figure hoping that they would deliver them from some kind of sad situation. That would never happen, and it would not happen on both sides of the aisle every 4 years. There's no way. There's no way we would pin all of our hopes on one person and pretend like it's the end of the world if they don't get elected, and everything will be fine if they do. We wouldn't do that because we are scientific. We have science and engineering and physics and science. That was my thinking. We would never do that. But this idea of a king is actually much more literal than I realized. Much more literal than I realized. There's a lot of genius in the Old Testament as well as the New. And one of the concepts they have is this concept of God being a king and worship being how you orient yourself to the king. But here's the crazy concept they have in the Old Testament. They didn't think that religion was something you had and it was a part of your life, like another hobby, you know what I mean? Or just another aspect of your life. They thought everybody's lives, all of it was religion. And so this is how they argued. They said, everybody's religious. Everybody worships. Everybody has a king. Everybody has a God. And I said, let's take the fool who says in his heart he has no God. And then they talk about what would that person organize their life around. Sometimes they organize their life around money. Sometimes they organize their life around like an adulterous relationship. Sometimes they organize their life around all kinds of things. And so that thing in the person's life around which everything else orbits, or the heaviest thing in a person's life toward which everything else rolls and moves, that's a person's God. You might not have a name for it, you might have a name for it, but everybody has a God and everybody's religious. And if you don't listen to the words of a person, but if you watch how they live, you can see how they worship. So in our context, sure, someone says they're a Christian, which means their first priority is to follow Jesus, and one of their other priorities is the pastor of the family. But they're at work 80 hours a week. They don't cultivate the relationship with their spouse at all. They're not investing in their kids. And then they never read the Bible. They never pray. They don't pay any attention to spiritual activities. But they are at church on Sundays, but that's it. Who's that person's God? Well, the wisdom of the Scripture would say, it's cute that you're saying it's Jesus, but it's actually your work. And maybe under your work, your God is some kind of sense of insecurity that you have to prove your existence to the world, and you think your job is the way you're going to do that. So actually, your God is your own insecurity. Isn't that genius? That's what the Bible teaches. All of life is religious, and everybody has a literal king, an actual thing that we actually choose to serve and devote and pledge our loyalty to, and swear an oath of fealty, hoping that if we give to this king, he will bless us with material blessing and things will go well. And nothing's changed. Like back then, they had different names for the different kings or the different gods. They had a god of youth. Thankfully, we have science now, so we don't worship youth anymore, right? We're okay with getting older because we know it's a mark of wisdom, and that gray hair is the honor of a person. We know that. We know wrinkles are good because it means you've been laughing a lot and you've acquired years of suffering, which have given you wisdom. We don't desperately try and ridiculously and like some kind of clown act like we're young forever at all, do we? It's like we still worship the God of youth. They used to call him juvenile, and they used to have a statue. We used to sacrifice stuff to him. Now it's just in a mirror, and we pay a doctor thousands of dollars to stay young. But it's a sacrifice we give to somebody else to bless us with youth. It's the same God. It's just a different name. Now we would probably call it self-care. Were there gods of prosperity? Yeah, you know one of the gods of prosperity? You wouldn't think of it, but it was Poseidon. Before you go on a trip, because a lot of the merchant trips were on ships, and so you'd want Poseidon to give you a good trip so you wouldn't die on the sea. And if you were in Antioch, you'd worship Poseidon in Antioch, and there was a different Poseidon in Rome, so if you're in Rome, you'd worship the Poseidon in Rome when you got there, just to make sure you had both sides covered. But what's good now is we have science, so we don't worship comfort, and we don't have the idea that pleasure is the same as happiness. Right? Because we're smarter than that because science. So it's cool that we don't believe in all the primitive superstitions all these cavemen believed in back then. We're better than that because science. Who are we lying to, man? Who are we kidding? And here's the thing, it's not superstition. Superstition is a fancy word I use to call things dumb I don't agree with. Okay, if you get to the philosophical core of what human beings have been doing every time, it's not called superstition, it's called design. It's human nature. You were created incomplete in and of yourself, so you seek something outside of yourself to complete yourself, and because of that, you seek a thing to worship or a purpose to devote your life to, and it gives your life meaning and direction, and something to sustain you in suffering. It's just some gods are better than others. Worshiping youth probably won't do it. Worshiping comfort probably won't do it. In fact, I've been making fun of our scientific perspective, but science has absolutely proven those things don't work. Those things don't work. So when it talks about Jesus being the Messiah, they thought he was a literal person who was a literal king. He was going to show up and build this political kingdom that was going to bring all this salvation. But it's not as naive as I thought it was because that's what we all do. We all think a literal person or a literal created thing is going to, if we serve it enough with enough loyalty, it's going to organize our life in a way to where we can be happy and blessed. We still do this. And then there's this weird ending. This is bizarre. There were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exiles of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Who cares? 14, 3 times. Nice. You know what's funny? The last section doesn't even have 14, it has 13. So Matthew was so intent on saying 14 3 times, he just didn't bother counting the last. He knew there were 13 in the last one, but he still emphasized 14 3 times. Why would he do that? Well, it turns out there's a reason for that too. You guys ready to get nerdy up in here? Okay, this is good stuff. Okay, when I write a number 1 in English, I use an Arabic numeral, right? We got that from the people of Arabics. And so, that's the technical term. And so we write a 1, and that's the number 1. Well, in other cultures, they didn't always use the Arabic numeral system, so they did other things to do numbers, like the Mayans would use dots, you know? The Romans, what did they use? They used letters. A capital, what we would call a capital I, that's a 1. A capital V is a 5. A capital C is 100. A capital L is 50. A capital M is 1,000. And the way they arranged the letters told you what the number was. Well, back in ancient times, a lot of cultures used their alphabet for numbers, just like Romans used certain letters. And the Hebrews did this as well. So, if I wanted to write out the number 14, it's kind of complicated. But if I want to write the number 14 in Hebrew using Greek letters, guess what I would write? I would write D, V, D, which spells out what? David. And this was common, and it's called gematria. And this is actually the key to interpreting the verse about the mark of the beast in the book of Revelation. Different sermon. But DVD is 14. So when he does this weird move, and you're like, what is this fool talking about? He says there were 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile of Messiah. He's saying David, David, David. Jesus is descended from kings. He's descended from Abraham himself. Jesus is the Messiah who is an anointed king who's come to do a new work that nobody, at this point in the book, totally understands. And he's so royal, he's so powerful, he's so kingly that he's David, David, David. And back, here's another nerd thing. They didn't have exclamation points in Koine Greek. And so guess what they would do, and not in Hebrew either, so guess what they would do to emphasize a word? They'd repeat it. And we do this a little bit too, right? So, do you like him, or do you like him? Right? That means something different. Is he annoying, or is he annoying? You know, just repeating the word emphasizes it more. So is God holy, or is God holy, holy, holy? He's holy, holy, holy. He's different. Absolutely unique, totally set apart. So is Jesus just another king among all these other gods? No. He's David, David, David. He's the deliverer, he's the conqueror, he's the powerful, he's the almighty who walks upon the clouds, walks upon the waters, tames the Leviathan. He is God himself who comes to reorganize the whole creation and is starting a new movement of new creation that reorganizes everybody's life, not around a false God in creation, but around the true God himself, Jesus. And by having your life organized around Jesus, things fall into place. And it doesn't mean life gets easy or comfortable. One of Jesus' promises we'll read about later is he says, in this world you will have trouble. I promise you. People will hate you. People will persecute you because you follow me. Your life's going to be hard. So if you've heard a gospel before that says something like, hey, if you follow God, everything's going to be happy. Hey, your marriage is going to be great. Hey, you'll never roll bankruptcy on Wheel of Fortune. I mean, everything's going to be perfect. I think the only problem with that theology is it contradicts Jesus. Jesus said, you will have trouble. You will suffer. You're in this world. You will suffer. But if you follow me and I'm your king, you can suffer well. And on the other end of suffering, you don't have to be bitter or angry or confused or lost. As your core identity, you can actually have a heart of larger compassion. You can see other people better than you could before. And you can know more about my heart that was willing to suffer for you. So this genealogy, it's weird that it starts with this, but it's not, because it's setting up some themes in the book and it's telling us Jesus is the king, the king, the king. And so you think, oh, well, great. I guess the Jews are going to get a king, or they're going to get their own country. Well, no. Because one other theme that this passage brings up is it starts to imply already that he's a king for everybody. He's not just another God to add to the list. So, some of you still worship youth, or you still worship another human being hoping that they can give you happiness, or if you organize your life around an addiction and you think if you just keep sacrificing enough to this addiction, it'll give you relief one more time. We still do that. And you think, okay, I'll just mix Jesus in there. This passage is saying that Jesus isn't just another God among other gods or a king among other kings. He's the God, the king, and there's none besides him. And here's how it does that. By the way, Matthew is commonly talked about as the gospel written for Jews, but that's an oversimplification by a long shot. He talks about Tamar. Read about Tamar in the book of Genesis, and you'll be like, what was that? What was that? And he brings her up on purpose. Talks about Ruth. Ruth was this Moabitess of all people. She was from Moab. What are those Moabitesses? And so she was a Moabitess, not a Jew. Everybody, Bathsheba, she was also a Moabitess, actually, because Uriah, no, she was a Hittite. Uriah was a Hittite. She was a Hittite. She was non-Jew. So everybody they go through. You see here that right off the bat, Matthew is seeing people that aren't normally seen, and Jesus is going to people that aren't normally noticed. That they pay attention to women in the genealogy, which was contradictory to the culture at the time. It was countercultural. And they're non-Jews. And it's going to get weirder. Guess who come and visit Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew? Is it priests of the law who know the Torah and have studied the Old Testament so thoroughly they knew when Jesus was going to be born and where? No, they're magi from the east. Now, what is magi? What do you think a word we get from magi is? Yeah, magic. These are magicians. These are sorcerers. In the Old Testament, do people tend to like sorcerers and magicians or no? No. By the way, I took the official Potter quiz, and I'm Slytherin. So, you too? Nice. Ravenclaw's whack. But you see this theme go through the book of Matthew, where Jesus is not just king of the Jews, he's king of everybody. He's king of everybody. So this genealogy exists to show us that Jesus is the king, he's the God we should organize our life around, and he was sent to everybody, even people other people don't see, who have very complicated pasts. Trust me, read the section about Tamar in Genesis. You'll be like, what is going on here? And I know some of you think that for some reason you're outside of God's grace. Or that God doesn't see you. Or that God doesn't know. And I think we all have this core fear when we make friends, If they really knew me, they wouldn't stay my friend. If they really knew me, they wouldn't respect me that much. They pull back and they judge me. And so we kind of manage ourselves. And instead of being present with other people, we present ourselves to other people. And we develop this persona so other people can be impressed by us, and we hide things back. That's why a big part of church and experiencing God's love is learning how to be who you actually are in front of everybody with all your complications and still experiencing the love of another Christian, because that shows the love of God has for you. And we learn about this in this passage. You're not forgotten by God. You're not unseen by God. You're not hated by God. You're not marginalized by God. To God, it's not a situation where you don't exist or you don't matter. Quite the contrary. If you're a woman, if you're a man, if you got a complicated past, if you're a Seahawks fan, a 49ers fan, God loves all. 49ers. So, here's the practical question. And don't tell me what you believe in response to this question. Tell me how you live. Who's your king? Whom do you actually serve? What is your life organized around? What do you make the greatest sacrifices to? What's your greatest hope? Where do you fear hell is? What are you running from and to, and what do you think is going to get you there? I've been a pastor for decades now. And I'm no longer naive enough to think that church equals Christian. It helps a lot. So I know not everybody sitting in this room feels entirely right with God, and not everybody in this room has even decided to follow God yet. So today we turn the tide, we change the direction. Whatever it is you actually organize your life around, if it's not Jesus, it's not the King. If it's not Jesus, it's not the King. Everything in our life should be oriented towards our faith in following Jesus. It's not a hobby. And that's why when Jesus talked about following him, he used language like, hey, when you come to follow me, you die. You die, and then you follow me. Like the life you used to have, it's over if you follow me. We're doing something entirely different. Which means as a husband, I had mixed motives when I got married, of course. Mostly I thought my wife was hot and I wanted to be with her forever. That's about how deep I was as a thinker then. But I got frustrated, into our marriage. I just thought, this isn't working. She doesn't make me happy anymore. I mean, in the beginning, it was so easy. It was so fun. We wanted to connect all the time. We were talking. We were like, no, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. No, you. Okay, I'm going to hang up. Oh, you didn't hang up. You didn't either. No, you. No, we do that stuff. It's cringy now, but we did it. That's how much we wanted to be connected. And then I thought, man, I don't want to be around her anymore. All she does is nag. She hates me. I mean, it seems like she doesn't like me. Nothing I do is right. And I do all this stuff, and she doesn't see any of it. And, we've all been there, right? I mean, those of us, we've all been there. And then I thought, okay, well, what's my king? Whom am I serving? What is my marriage for? Well, it turned out at the time, my actual king, I knew the theology. I could quote the verses to you. I know where to go in the Bible about mutual submission and all this other stuff. I know to do that stuff. But in practice, my wife was a tool for me to be a happier person, and happiness meant managing my mood most of the time. So I'd be in a good mood instead of a bad one. And then I read the scriptures and I think about how Jesus lived. And he said, well, marriage is an image of Jesus and the church. And so husbands, you should love your wife like Jesus loved the church. Well, how did Jesus love the church? Well, he didn't use the church so he could control his own mood. When the church had nothing to offer Jesus, he died for the church. And he thought, no matter what it takes, if I can make you more holy, if I can present you as a bride perfectly adorned for the husband, that's what this is about. And so I started looking at my marriage and thinking, well, this sucks. Because I've been doing it wrong. It turns out I'm not married so I can have self-fulfillment, whatever that is, that day. Turns out I'm married so that my wife can know more about the love of God through me, and that's going to take a lot of sacrifice, and it's going to look like paying attention and working hard at it every single day for the rest of my life. It's going to be a very ordinary, every minute, quiet, faithful thing. Which isn't what I signed up for. I mean, don't get me wrong, I said the words, for better or worse, for richer or poor. I mean, I said all that stuff, but behind that I was thinking, hope she makes me happy. Then when she doesn't make me happy, marriage isn't working. Well, that's because that's not what it's for. If I orient it around my old God and my false king, that's what I do with marriage. If I orient it around Jesus, I look at my wife, who is actually giving as much to the relationship as I am. I'm just being self-centered and self-absorbed and bitter, so I don't see it. But I feel like she's giving 0%, and I say, you know what, I'm going to keep giving 100. Because this isn't about me. It means you look at your kids differently, and you think, these aren't my kids. These are God's children. And God loves my kids even more than I do. And I'm not the only parent involved in this situation because God is also parenting with me. So how do I raise my children in a way to where Jesus is the center of my life, it's organized around the King, and they know how to suffer well, to love other people diligently, and to forgive, and to live a life that's as close to the middle of God's will as possible. We look at our work, we look at our time, we look at our hobbies, we look at everything, and we think, okay, if Jesus is my King, how do I organize my life around that? If you do that, I promise two things will happen. Your old life will die. You have to renounce your old citizenship before you can become a citizen of the kingdom. But the second thing that will happen is you'll be saved. It's an old school word, but there's not one better. You'll be saved. You'll be saved from a silly, confused, self-centered life that tries to organize and desperately clamor for every inch and grope for every scrap so that you can cuddle and put together some pathetic version of what you think a good life is. It means you base your life on conviction instead of convenience. And it means that even in the hardest times, you have a sense of meaning and direction and purpose that won't make you happy all the time, and it won't make you win all the time. Even God lost on the cross in a sense, right? But it means that you'll be saved from this ridiculous life that's organized around a false God that leads to all kinds of misery and suffering. So as we take communion today, you guys can start passing it out. As we take communion today, if you take communion, if you eat the wafer, if you drink the juice, this is what you're saying. You're saying, I don't know how this works. I don't know the details. I don't have it all figured out, but I know I want you to be my King. I know I want you to be my King. And again, you're not outside of God's grace. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything. You just have to make a decision. And it's like every other important decision in your life. You're never really ready to make it. You just need a little bravery. So if you feel led to do this, I just want you to jump. So spend some time with God in prayer for a moment, and we'll take the elements together. But if you take the elements, you're saying that I am a Christian, Jesus is my King, and I want to start pledging loyalty to that King and following that King instead of the false king and the false God I've been worshiping otherwise.